Hi, everyone, and welcome to week 2. So these are the announcements for the week. So first, we're going to start off and go over some feedback from our first assignment on perusal. Then I'm going to talk about registering for CITI training and give you some tips for that. Then I'm going to talk about our research proposal and the research question that you are going to be submitting this week, and then leave you with a weekly checklist. So let's start with some feedback for chapter 1. So chapter 1 was an introduction to educational research, and then chapter 2 went over some of the paradigms. So one of the questions that came up was about action research. And action research, there is a whole chapter about action research, which is chapter 3. I didn't include that chapter in this course because I know that a lot of people take the research course Action Research, but if you're not planning on taking that course, you might want to consult chapter 3 for some more detail about action research. But I do want to include a little mini lecture here about action research. So as we talked about last week, action research is focused on practitioners identifying and coming up with solutions and then testing whether those solutions work to their local problems. And so someone asked a really good question: how is action research different from applied research? Well, action research is related to applied research in that it does take place in a local setting and it is focused on coming up with a solution for a specific problem, but it is different from applied research because it's not meant to be generalizable beyond the practitioner's practice themselves. So this is a table that was included in chapter 3 that's helpful for understanding how action research is different. So action research is a cycle. So it's more of a practice of research as opposed to carrying out a research study. So as you can see here, these arrows are iterative, and so you are constantly engaged in the action research cycle at some point. So you as a practitioner, you might notice a problem and notice, so you might start, it says you can start wherever. So you might notice a problem, you might be reflecting here, notice a problem, and you might plan something that you want to try. And then you yourself will act and carry out the research. That's another thing that can be different between action research and applied research. In applied research, researchers themselves are not always the one that are carrying out the intervention. So you'll act and you will carry out your investigation, your intervention. And as you go, you will collect data and then you reflect, what does that mean? What do you want to do next? So again, it's like an iterative process focused on improving practice over time. So there's no start or end point to action research. A practitioner who has an action research approach is always involved in the research. And again, it's meant to inform their own practice. They can, of course, share it with their colleagues, but it's not meant to be generalizable to other schools or settings per se. Was there anything else for that? Okay, so this table kind of also talks about the difference between basic research and action research. So it is very different, of course, from basic research that is meant to produce knowledge and be extremely generalizable, more related to theory, and is more related to applied research. However, it's really focused on a specific location, and you are both the researcher and the practitioner. And so I really think that the cycle is what makes it different. And then also action research, you are always going to be both the researcher and the person carrying out the intervention. And that's not always the case in applied research. So hopefully that was helpful to help understand the difference between action research and applied. And if action research is something that you are interested in and you want to craft your research proposal, they call it action plans. They mention this in chapter 3 here. You might want to reference chapter 3 too to give you some more detail as you're planning your research proposal. And then so this was really interesting too from chapter 3. So within action research, there's so many different types. One type is participatory action research that might be a research team. This is something that I have done with my colleagues that also teach third grade. We have done an action research project together where we come together. If you're familiar with PLCs, or professional learning communities, they are taking a action research approach. It could be critical, feminist, action science, or appreciative inquiry. There's all sorts of different approaches. Again, it could be individual, it could be a collaborative approach that colleagues are doing together. So this again is from chapter 3 if you are interested. So this, when we're thinking about the strengths and weaknesses, I wanted to share this because it might provide some insights that help you better understand the distinction between action research and applied. So some of the strengths, of course, the local practitioners can do it themselves. It promotes being a lifelong learner and researcher, and it positions practitioners as having a lot of ownership over their own practice. It improves their practice, again, empowers them, and helps describe some of the complexities that you're only going to see if you are also in the field at the same time. Now, with those weaknesses, these weaknesses are why we need other approaches such as applied research. Like I mentioned, it can be difficult to generalize. So just because something works for one practitioner in one setting, with an action research approach, that wouldn't necessarily mean that it could be generalized to somewhere else. And oftentimes, since action research is something that is ongoing, that is constantly being carried out, it doesn't always rise to the same level of rigor in terms of having the statistical analyses or the more extensive data analysis that more applied research would use. And again, it's definitely not going to have cause and effect. They mention here that it often uses weaker design. It doesn't have to be the case. But again, since this is something that is just married to someone's practice, it often does use designs that are easier to employ on a day-to-day level. Okay, so another interesting thing, so that's done with action research. So another interesting thing that came up in the discussion about chapter 1 and 2 is the overall purpose of science or empirical research. And so we had a really interesting discussion on Zoom, and this came up on Perusal as well, about research being meant to find evidence that something might be the case as opposed to trying to prove. And so this relates again to the sources of knowledge. And when you are using empiricism or observation, you are always collecting this evidence that indicates that something is the case as opposed to finding proof. And another thing that I wanted to talk about was orientational research. This is something that a lot of people indicated that they were interested in. And so the authors, the way that they describe orientational research is that it is meant for advancing an ideological position. And while that's true, I do want to provide sort of my own commentary on this. So the authors mention as well that orientational research is often aligned with a critical perspective that many researchers take on. And so that is a type of research that you will come across often, is critical from a critical perspective or critical research. And so the ideological position that this research is advancing relates to the assumption that power in our society is unequally distributed. So when researchers carry out critical research, they make clear what their assumptions are. And they might have more specific assumptions related to race or gender, but their overarching assumption is that there is this power imbalance in our society that is wrong. And so in order for critical research to rise to the standards of empiricism and in order to be considered science, researchers make clear what their ideological position is before conducting their research. So that when you are evaluating research that's done from an orientational perspective or critical research, you should make sure that the researchers have stated what assumptions that they're making before planning and carrying out their study and analyzing their study. And also, many critical researchers think that researcher positionality is important. They think that it's impossible to be neutral, and therefore research is more trustworthy when researchers themselves talk about who they are and how their identity relates to the research question and may impact not only their purpose, but their data collection and their analysis. So I did want to mention that about orientational research. And then this chart is also included in the lecture slides from last week's perusal. And so this will be very helpful as you, again, are crafting your research purpose and your question, and then the subsequent parts of your research proposal. So we'll be, like I mentioned, continuing to add layers to this. So next I want to go to the multiple choice questions that we answered and talk a little bit about those. Okay, so first of all, I adjusted the settings. So in the future, when you answer the multiple choice questions, it will give you feedback right away, but I didn't select that for this week, so I want to go over it now. So question 1 was talking about the overall purpose of educational research. And again, like we just mentioned, it's not meant to help you prove something, but instead find evidence in support of an idea or a concept. And so educational research will help practitioners critically reflect on claims about educational practice. Question 2, again, is focused on orientational research, and the aim of orientational research being focused on both describing and identifying inequity in society, but then also coming up with solutions to inequity in society. Epistemology being the theory of knowledge and its justification. So when researchers are thinking about their research purpose and the different questions and designs that they ask, that is based on how they view their epistemology in terms of what knowledge is and how it can be justified. So mixed methods, and I can tell that there's a lot of enthusiasm around mixed methods. So I'm anticipating seeing a lot of that come through in your research proposals. So an example of that would be pulling from both quantitative and qualitative sources. So interviews, a qualitative example, and then a questionnaire, which would be a quantitative example, and then marrying those results together. Now, non-experimental research. Remember, non-experimental research can be quantitative. So not all quantitative studies are experimental. All experimental studies are quantitative, but not all quantitative are experimental. So when you're thinking about non-experimental research, and then this is going to come up in the lecture this week for chapter 4 and 5 about non-experimental versus experimental. Non-experimental research that uses quantitative data is going to be focused on correlation. So here we see the researcher looks at the correlation between reading speed and reading comprehension. So with that, the researcher might be able to make some predictions, but they're not able to identify causation. You need experimental research to do that. And so this question was about experimental research. So experimental research does rely on quantitative data, but the difference between non-experimental and experimental, non-experimental, you're looking at the relationship between two variables and the correlation. Experimental, you actually control for other variables in order to help you potentially identify causation. So with experimental research, you are going to have some type of manipulation where one group is receiving an intervention and the other group is not, to see if there's a difference. And in experimental research, you try to control for all other external factors or variables to make sure that the treatment that one group is getting is actually the thing that is causing the difference, if there is one. So the example of experimental research was where the researcher is manipulating a type of memory strategy. And the manipulating means that one group would get the memory strategy and then the other group would not get that one. And then they measure how well students are able to recall information. And then the last question was the most specific. And so this question was about a student who was studying about study abroad experiences. And so in this instance, they said that they wanted to let their conclusions emerge from the work. So whenever researchers, qualitative researchers, are writing about the patterns and the themes emerged from the data, that's a really common language. You're using grounded theory research. And so again, that's a qualitative approach, and we are going to go into that. I think, I can't remember, it's maybe chapter like 17, maybe, that's about qualitative approaches. So she starts with the data and then lets the theories emerge from the ideas, and then confirms the theory. So that is an example of grounded theory. Okay, so those were the questions that we asked for the first perusal. Okay, the next announcement that I want to make is about our assignment that is due September 11th, and that is the CITI training. So this is the training that you need in order to be able to conduct research at Georgia State. So in this class, we're going to be learning about how to design research and writing a research proposal. You're not expected to actually carry out your study, but the CITI training does help you review a lot of the ethical principles that are necessary and that you can keep in mind when you are planning your proposal. So this also goes with, and I'll show you where to find this in iCollege. So the link is in iCollege. When you click the link in iCollege, it will say register. It will take you here, and you need to click register. So that will be the third option here. You'll click register. And once you click register, you will be able to organize or register through your organization. So you'll type in Georgia State University, and then you will click continue to create your new username and password for CITI. Now, once you have registered, you need to select your course. And the course that we are going to be doing is Group 2, Social and Behavioral. So there's 12 modules. That's the only one that you need to do, is Group 2, Social and Behavioral. And so once you have finished your module, they will give you a certificate. This certificate is what you're going to upload to iCollege for your assignment. Now, when you are going through the 12 modules, you will get, they'll give you a quiz at each of the module. So your quiz score doesn't affect your grade. So it's worth 10 points. If you complete it and get the certificate, you will get 10 points. So your quiz scores, you are able to retake them, and you do have to get a certain score to pass to receive the certificate. But your actual scores, I won't see those. I'll just see once you have passed and you have the certificate. So don't worry too much about your exact quiz scores. If you get one that's a little lower than you had hoped, that's okay. Again, you are able to retake it, and your scores won't correlate with your grade for this class. So it's a 10 points. Once you make it through those 12 modules, you will get your 10 points. Okay, so now I'm here in iCollege to show you where you can find information for the CITI training assignment. So if you go to the table of contents, if you go down to Module 2, which is what we're in now, planning the research study, you will see week 2 perusal, research proposal, question, and then your CITI training certificate. So when you view this topic, so here you will see the link to register, and that's the steps that I just walked you through. And this is a reminder about which to choose. You're choosing Group 2, Social and Behavioral Studies. You'll complete the 12 modules, and then what you will upload will be your certificate of completion. And did I include an attachment? Okay, so I am going to include this attachment here. So these are some notes to help you study for the CITI training. So these go through each of the modules. There's 12 modules. I have one for each module. And so it just gives you some notes, some big ideas that you can use as you are completing those modules and completing the quizzes that go with each of those. So it just starts off with the same steps, some reminders about how to register, and then a few notes about each of those modules. So I'm going to attach this to iCollege. So you have that to study. Let me do that right now so I don't forget. So the next announcement that I want to make is about your potential research question that is going to go with the research proposal assignment. So this is due this Sunday, September 4th. And this is going to be an iCollege. You don't need to upload a document. You can just type in the box because it's going to be short. You're going to state a couple words about what your research topic is, and then you are going to submit your first draft of a research question or a couple questions if you want feedback. So this is a chance for you to use what you learned in chapter 4 and 5 and so far to start developing a research question. Of course, this is not going to be your final question, but this is going to give me a chance to give you some feedback to help make sure that your question is an empirical question that can be tested, and that if you have variables, that those are stated, and if it's a qualitative question, that it is based on one of the research purposes. So once you watch the lecture for chapter 4 and 5 and read those chapters, hopefully that will help give you some more information to help you refine some questions to get started with that. And again, that will be due in iCollege. I'll put a link to that in the announcement for this week. So here is your checklist for the week. So by Sunday, September 4th, you will complete perusal number 2. And that perusal will have 4 parts, just like this week. It'll have the lecture slides, open-ended questions, and then multiple choice questions. So the multiple choice questions are there if you like them, but as far as your grade for 3 points, that will come from watching the lecture, reading through the slides and questions. For the lecture, try to leave a comment, and then for the slides and the open-ended questions, you can leave 2 to 4 comments there. And then the multiple choice questions, if you want to do those will contribute to your grade as well. But it is possible to get the full 3 points by only leaving annotations if you're not feeling the multiple choice. And also by Sunday, September 4th, you are going to write your potential research question in iCollege. So again, this is just a first draft. So you can write down your ideas there and I will give you feedback. We're not going to have a Zoom this week, but we will have, so since there's not a Zoom this week, you do have to do the perusal for your 3 participation points, but we are going to have a perusal or a Zoom discussion next week on Thursday, September 8th at 5:15. I really enjoyed everyone who came. So I know that a couple other people are interested. So if you are interested, we will have that optional Zoom discussion next Thursday, September 8th, and that will serve as 3 points towards one of your module 2 discussions. And then another thing to be thinking about is your CITI training, which is due September 11th. And it is 12 modules. So I would suggest that you do get registered and get started. Use that study guide that I attached in iCollege and maybe do just a couple modules every other day, so it doesn't feel so overwhelming to get through all 12 of those modules. So that is your checklist for this week. I look forward to seeing your comments on perusal. I've been going through and answering questions as they come up and responding to your wonderings there. And please reach out via email if you have any questions. And I'm excited to see your research questions. So I'm wishing you a great week. I know that we have, hopefully you have a holiday weekend coming up, so you get a little bit of a break, and hopefully you get to spend some time with some people important to you. So I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.